Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, which is an introduction to the Road Safety Risk Manager. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on Rsrm, as you probably recognise it better. Today's webinar will be delivered by our Rsrm resident experts, and they are Ganesh. There we go, there you are, Ganesh Vengadasalam, who's our Senior Research Engineer from our Sydney office, and there's his details up there, and Simon Chia, who's our Transport Engineer here in our Melbourne office. Now we're just going to give everyone a chance to log in. There's still a few people logging in as we go, so we'll just run through the housekeeping items. And my name's Kathy Dekouris. I'll be your moderator today. So basically any questions or any comments that you have, please don't hesitate to type them in, and we'll go through those at designated question times. Today's webinar will run for approximately an hour, of which we have presentation time of about 40 minutes and plenty of time for questions. Now, do not hesitate to send your questions through at any time throughout the presentation, so you don't have to wait specifically for the question time. You will also receive a recording of today's webinar within the next 48 hours, as well as a copy of the presentation via email, so that will come to you then. So we talked about the questions box, and you can see that on your screen now. So that's where you type in your questions or any comments. We may also have some questions that we ask you out there, the audience, so if we do and we ask you to raise your hand, there's a little icon there that raises your hand. Now just to check that everybody's familiar with where the questions box is, if you don't mind just typing in your name and location, and we might read some of those out, and we'll just know that everybody's comfortable and familiar with where the questions box are. So if you just type in your name and where you're from, that'll be terrific. Thank you, Chris from the Gold Coast. First in, Brendan from Hellerang Council, Bill from Wagga Wagga, Andrew Toowoomba, Tim Perth. Oh wow, yes, you certainly do know how to use the question box. Thank you, David from Mornington, Michael from Calgary, Canada. Well, hello for our international audience. Ian from Stonington, Nigel from Launceston, Keith from Blue Mountains. Lovely, lovely locations. Well, we're here in, Simon and I are here in Melbourne, and Ganesh is in Sydney, and I think it might be just about time to hand it over to you. Thanks, Ganesh.
All right. Thanks, Kathy, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. We appreciate you taking the time out of your work day to join us today. Just looking at the introductions, we've got quite a few delegates joining us from all of Australia, New Zealand, as well as international from Canada. So that's great to see lots of interest from Rsrm. And we hope that by the end of today's webinar, you get some more knowledge about Rsrm, what it is, and hopefully look at its benefits and how it will benefit you in your projects and help you improve your road safety issues that you might have in your jurisdiction. So I'd just like to get started on the webinar. I just want to present the overview or the outline of the webinar today. I will introduce the objectives and expected learning outcomes of what you'll be able to take away from today's webinar. I will describe the Road Safety Risk Manager, what it is, why you use it, and how you apply it. And we'll do this by, at the end, we'll go through a work example of how you apply Rsrm, how you use the software, how you go about using it to analyze the road safety issue that you may have on your road network.
Sorry, Ganesh, to butt in there for a moment. We're actually getting some comments through that your audio's a little bit on the lower side. Do you think you're able to talk a little bit closer to the mic?
Yeah. Is this better? Just fine. It's much better.
Just nice and close to the mic, and if anyone in our audience can tell us if that's any better.
Just testing the mic. Is that much better?
No. Yes, a bit. No, not really.
Mixed reviews.
Yes, mixed reviews. Yeah, perhaps if you can make a point of keeping it nice and close, that would be terrific.
Okay. I'll try to speak a bit loudly, so that helps. Okay. I'll just carry on. So the objective of today's webinar is to introduce the Rsrm, what it is, its background, how it was developed, and how you apply it to analyze and manage your road safety issues in the road network. And the expected learning outcome from today is to hopefully you gain insight into Rsrm and what it is and how you could go away from today and how you could use Rsrm to manage and improve the road safety issues on your road network. And just like to do a poll question here, just like to gauge your knowledge of your existing knowledge of Rsrm. So, Kathy, you want to start the poll?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ganesh. So we've just launched a poll there, and you're all getting quite into it. So the question is, how much do you know about Rsrm? So select one of the answers. Do you have a good knowledge, some knowledge? You have heard of Rsrm but not sure, or have not heard? And we have almost all of our audience voting. So if you just select one of the buttons there and submit your answer, just leave that open for another second. And okay, so we'll close that off now. Nearly got everyone in there. And the results are, so we have 3% have indicated they have a good knowledge of Rsrm, 24% have some knowledge of Rsrm, 42% have heard of Rsrm but not sure what it is, and 31% have not heard of Rsrm prior to this webinar. So certainly there's not a lot of information, I guess, out there. Ganesh, what do you think?
Yeah, it's good to see that some have heard and for those who have not heard of Rsrm, this webinar hopefully give you a bit more information about Rsrm and what it is and how we go about using it and how it applies to improving the road safety issues in the road network. So definitely at the end of today's webinar, we will gain some insight into Rsrm and help you with your road safety analysis. I'd like to introduce the 5 road safety tools that we have at ARRB that ARRB has developed over the years to assist road practitioners in improving the road safety issues on the road network. I'll concentrate on the first 2 tools, the Australian National Risk Assessment Model, the ANRAM, and the Road Safety Risk Manager, Rsrm. For this webinar, for the purpose of this webinar, I will not cover the other 3, but if you'd like to know more about the other 3 software tools, you could send us a question and we'll get back to you after the webinar, or the software tools are well explained on our website, so you can just go to our company website, shown at the bottom of the slide, to give you more information on the software tools. And I'd like to set the context of why I'm choosing to talk about the first 2 tools, the ANRAM and Rsrm. First, you've got to look at how road safety is managed in Australia. In Australia, the standard way we approach road safety issues is from a safe system perspective, or safe system approach. For those delegates who may not know what safe system is, I'll quickly explain what safe system approach is. Safe system approach is defined as road users on a road network. It could be the drivers of vehicles, it could be the users like pedestrians, cyclists on the road network. The concept is these road users will make mistakes while using the road network. And as a result of this mistake, a crash occurs, and they may suffer fatal or serious injuries. And the safe system approach is to tackle the road safety issues so that if a mistake occurs, the road user does not suffer fatal or serious injuries. So you're trying to eliminate fatal or serious injuries from as a result of a crash occurring. So you're trying to manage the crash risk. You're doing risk-based approach of the road safety issues, identifying the hazards and coming up with treatment options to improve the situation so that you could eliminate fatal and serious injuries. And this is where the two tools, ANRAM and Rsrm, comes in. These are two road safety tools that are based on a risk-based approach to improve road safety on the road network. And how does ANRAM and Rsrm differentiate from each other? If you look at this figure here, it clearly shows the differences between ANRAM and Rsrm. ANRAM works on a much bigger scale. It's on a macroscopic level. And Rsrm is on a smaller scale. It's on a site-specific or a microscopic level. ANRAM looks at overall at the road network on a much bigger area. So you're looking at maybe on a city level. You're analyzing the risk on the road network on a big city level. And once you've analyzed which roads are at risk, you use Rsrm to analyze the site level, the microscopic level. So Rsrm looks at road safety issues at specific sites. So you might have a certain intersection, you might have a four-arm signalized intersection, or you may have a roundabout, or you may have a pedestrian crossing that has a safety issue that you want to analyze. So this is how Rsrm and ANRAM are different. ANRAM works on a bigger scale, on a macroscopic scale, and Rsrm on a smaller scale, site-specific on a microscopic scale. And just like to ask another poll question, what Rsrm can be used for. And Kathy, would you like to use the poll question?
Terrific, thank you, Ganesh. And apologies, we're still getting some comments to say that Ganesh sounds a little bit echoey. So we seem to be having some issues with our Sydney audio. However, we'll launch this poll. So, what can Rsrm be used for? And our options are to identify hazards, identify treatment options, develop costs of the treatments, prioritise sites for treatments, or all of the above. And we're just waiting for those votes to come through. And we also have a question that's come through which I might present to our presenters. Has the ISO 31000 risk management standard been incorporated into Rsrm? And joining us today is actually Phil Roper as well for special comments and answers. So Phil, can you tell us about...
Yes, I can tell you a little bit. We haven't put ISO 31000 compliance into Rsrm. It still uses the same basic architecture that it has been using since it was invented, and we haven't gone through the process of trying to make it compliant with the ISO. It's broadly compliant with the Australian standard on risk management, using exposure to risk and then the likelihood of something going wrong and then the consequences. But we haven't gone through and checked and improved it up to the ISO 31000 standard yet.
Thank you, Phil. So we have just closed off that poll, and the results that have come in is 77% have said all of the above, with the next highest being 11% to prioritise site for treatment. Ganesh, can you tell us what does that mean to you?
Oh yeah, it's a bit of a tricky question actually. Rsrm, those who chose prioritized sites for treatment, you got it right. Because Rsrm is not a tool that is going to help you with your crash investigation. It doesn't identify hazards, and it doesn't identify treatment options for you. This will be done prior to using Rsrm. So you have identified your hazards, identify your treatment. So what Rsrm does is, based on the input that you've given, you prioritize the sites for treatment based on the level of risk reduction. So those are selected D, well done, very right. So I will explain this further as the webinar goes through, and it will become much clearer. So I'd just like to get to the background of Rsrm. Rsrm was developed and launched in October 2002. It was a research project in collaboration with ARRB and Rsrm. It was part of an Rsrm research project that Rsrm was developed. And back in 2002, Rsrm was a disk-based software tool. So those who signed up to Rsrm were given this and they uploaded the software to the desktop. But this was, the feedback was a bit inefficient. So over the years it was developed, and now it's a web-based tool. It's online. So users log on and access it online. And this is efficient because with software tools, you're going to have updates, you're going to have tweaks every now and then. So with having it based online, so when users log on to Rsrm, they are using the most updated software that's been updated with the latest release. And over the years, since 2002, there have been a number of updates to the software, with the latest update being 2014. And the update includes the update to risk factors that are based on the ongoing current research. And what is Rsrm? Why would you use it, and when can you use it? Firstly, what is Rsrm? The Road Safety Risk Manager is a proactive treatment prioritization tool. And what do I mean by proactive? Proactive means you are analyzing the sites that may have a crash issue. You may have 3, 5, or a number of sites, a group of sites that you have identified in the area that you control, the area that within your jurisdiction that you think has a crash issue. And you've got to look at how you're going to improve the situation, how you're going to invest money in improving all the sites. Are you going to invest? Which sites you're going to treat first? So you are taking action before the crash issue becomes a cluster, becomes a problem, becomes a black spot issue. So you're being proactive to use Rsrm to identify which sites you're going to treat first. And why would you do it? It's quite simple. Why you use Rsrm is to improve road safety. That's what's the main aim of Rsrm. It's a road safety improvement tool. You use it to develop and assess and prioritize suitable treatment options. It helps you select which sites to invest money in, and how you're going to come up with a program that works to tackle the road safety issues within your area of control. And when would you use it? You could use Rsrm as part of the road safety audit recommendation. When you do a road safety audit, you might have a list of recommendations to implement, and you may decide which recommendations you will implement first, which recommendation you will implement later. This is how Rsrm can assist you. You can put in the treatment options, gives relative risk, and then as a road practitioner, you can decide how about you're going to carry out these treatment options. The type of issues where Rsrm, where you can use it, it's what the number of sites where you can use it. And this slide just explains some of the areas where you can use it. For example, you may have an approach onto a curve that has quite a bit of loss of control crashes. So you might think, oh, you're going to put more signage, more delineation to improve the situation. Rsrm can help you show you what are the relative risks of the before and after case. You may have intersection issues where you might have visibility issues, fault visibility issues. We have alignment issues such as on the approach to the roundabout where there's interception deflection. And these are just some of the areas that Rsrm could be used. And in the software, it tells a lot more areas where it could be used. These are just some of the areas that I just picked out for the webinar. And that comes up to our next core question. How do you think the projects that you use Rsrm should be prioritized? Okay.
Thank you, Ganesh. Yes, so that poll has been launched, and we might, if it's okay, while people are popping in their answers for that one, how the projects should be prioritised. Is it the project with the highest risk, the project that reduces the risk by most, the project with the lowest cost, or the greatest risk reduction for the given budget? We also have had some questions coming in, Ganesh, so we might take a moment to ask a couple of questions as well while everyone's getting their votes in. There was a question from Brett asking, does that mean it cannot be used to assess risk, only to rank risk?
You want me to answer?
And Phil's volunteered to take that one.
Right.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, it gives you the ability to assess the risk yourself. You'll see in some of the demonstration screens and in the worked example that Simon will go through that Risk Manager gives you suggestions on how much the risk will increase due to a certain road feature having a certain level of quality or compliance with its usual requirements. So you can assess the risk in that way, and it's looking at the crash risk, or the likelihood of crashes happening, and also how severe they'll be if they do happen. So it's for doing that, and then you can also use it to rank all of the treatments that you come up with for different sites once you've assessed the risk. But I don't want to say too much or I'll get too far ahead of what Ganesh is up to.
Terrific. Thanks, Phil. And just one more question. Can Rsrm be used for private roads as well as public, for example, shopping centre car parks?
Yes, you can use it for those environments. There'll be certain road features that you wouldn't find in smaller areas like that and that are really confined to highways, but certainly where you've got traffic interacting with the road environment or pedestrians, or any other road users, you can usually find a way to use Risk Manager to decide which projects might be the best value.
Terrific. Thank you, Phil. So we just about have everyone with their votes in, and the vast majority, 70%, thought the greatest risk reduction for the given budget is how the projects should be prioritised. And following that one is the project with the highest risk, which was 20%, and 10% selected the project that reduces the risk by the most. Ganesh, I think everyone's on it.
Yeah, I think everyone's got it. That's right. The answer is D, and it's quite a bit of a tricky question. And you've got it right. The answer is D. Project that provides the greatest risk reduction for a given budget. Yep. That's what you want to achieve, the maximum benefit from your project. You want to look at how much relative risk you can achieve for the amount of capital invested. So I don't want to jump ahead so much, so I'll just get to my next slide where I'll tell you how you go about using Rsrm. This is just an overview. We will go through this process shortly in a work example. But I just wanted, for the benefit, I think it would be good to just describe the process of Rsrm. Firstly, you might select a site. So you select the sites and input this into Rsrm. You may have just one site, or you may have a number of sites, a group of sites, 5, 6, so on. And you identify the hazards of what are the hazards that you think are contributing to the crashes. And Rsrm assesses the risk of crash occurring as a result of these hazards. and then you select treatment options, and Rsrm assesses the risk of a crash occurring after the treatment option is selected. And based on this, you assess the relative risk and associated costs, and you prioritize your projects. And the aim is to maximize your benefit, maximize your risk reduction per amount of money invested. So for example, let's say you have a roundabout. Let's take a roundabout which has, and you've identified by your site investigation, your crash investigation, there are lots of loss of control, and you've identified that there's a lack of deflection as the hazard. So you input that into Rsrm, and you've decided that, okay, for the treatment options, you're going to select maybe changing the work alignment, create a bit more deflection, and that you put that into Rsrm, you get the relative risk of the before and after, you get the cost, and you prioritize the project. And you may do this for several different sites, and based on the output, you can see which sites you're going to achieve the maximum benefit in terms of risk reduction per amount of capital spent. And we'll go through this in a work example in a couple more slides, and then you get a better picture of how it works, and probably be able to understand it better of the benefit of Rsrm. But before you do, a few important considerations that you need to know when you use Rsrm. Rsrm, at the end of the day, is a software tool. It will only provide the output of what you put in. And so if you put in the relevant information, it will give you the relevant output. If you put in inappropriate information, give it inappropriate output. So when you apply Rsrm, you need to apply using good engineering knowledge. It's not a crash investigation tool, so Rsrm should not be used to identify what's the problem on the site, what's the hazard, and what you're going to implement to solve the crashes. The crash investigation, the site investigation should be done prior, so that you know why are the crashes occurring, what's causing the crashes, and what are possible treatment options, the range of treatment options, whether it could be size, whether you could change the road alignment, it could be road markings, etc., that could help improve this crash situation. So one important thing to note is, the two important things to note is, it needs to be based on good engineering knowledge, and it's definitely not a crash investigation tool. And if there is a mandatory requirement to fix an issue, for example, if there is a requirement to provide a specific warning sign at a site, it should be just provided. It should not be, Rsrm should not be used to assess whether this sign should be provided. So if there's a requirement to provide a sign, you should just go ahead and provide a sign. So requirement to fix it, just fix it. So before we get into the next section of the webinar, which is the work example part, I just wanted to see if there's any questions that we've got through from the start, so that we can just take a couple of questions before we get to the work example portion.
Terrific, thank you, Ganesh. Now we've got a few questions in. Thank you to those of you asking your questions. We have, can it be used for estimating cost for the treatment? And Phil?
I can answer that.
Yep.
Yes. In a word, no. You need to know what the treatment is that you are going to use at your site, and you need to know what it's going to cost. It just prompts you to put in the cost of actually applying the treatment, and then the annual cost of maintaining it. So the point of Risk Manager really is, when you come to it with a suite of projects at different sites, and you've identified problems everywhere and you know what you want to do to fix them, and your only issue is that you don't have enough money to fix every site in a single year of budget. And so you need to know which sites to do first to get the best value out of your safety dollars. And that's where Risk Manager comes in and helps you, because it allows you to estimate what the risk reduction will be at all of these sites, compare that with the dollars that you'll be spending to fix the problems, and then allow you to compare your risk reduction per dollar across the sites and pick the best value solutions.
Great, thank you. Now, does that also answer a bit of a question from Daniel? You said RSRM does not identify hazards, but it now seems you're applying the same risk assessment principle.
Well, yeah, we're still not using it to identify what the hazards are. We're just using it to advise you on the degree of crash likelihood modification that is likely to happen because of what you are doing to fix a hazard. So it assumes that you already know how to spot a problem on a road and how to fix it, and that you just need a bit of assistance on working out how good your treatment is going to be, because this is all built on research that looks at the crash reductions achieved with different types of treatments. And so it collects all of that together, and instead of you having to read all of the research papers on how well a roundabout functions or how well speed humps reduce speeds and things like that, this draws it together and turns it into relative risk ratios for you.
Terrific, thank you, Phil. We might just take one more question at this time, and can RSRM be worked on arterial roads and local roads?
Oh yes, it has issue types that would suit both of those road environments, and when Simon shows you the example, you'll see that he has to pick which type of road environment he's working on right at the start, and so that should illustrate that. There are quite a lot of questions here, so we'll be able to answer them all in text, but we won't have time to talk about them all in this session, I'd say, but we will do our best.
Terrific, thank you, Phil. We'll get into the worked example, and Simon Chair will take us through that. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks, Kathy. So for today's example, we'll assess the value of installing a centre line along a length of road. So you can see the key facts for the site shown on the slide. So yes, you will need to gather the relevant site details before you start your assessment. So for our example, we have Theodore Moore Road. It's an undivided local road in a rural open area. It carries about 400 vehicles per day and has a speed limit of 100 kilometres per hour. So to get started, I'll just jump into the Rsrm tool.
Seems to have logged you out there, Simon.
Yes.
So we'll just log back in.
Oops, that. So try again.
So here you're at the Road Management Software Solutions, and this actually incorporates a few different software programs that we have. Is that right? So once you log in here and then oh, okay. And then sometimes what happens, it disconnects. So we'll take some more questions, shall we, Phil, while Simon sorts that one out. So we've had a question from Matt, asking, can this be used to replace the Queensland RISC software?
I will have to look into that one and get back to you, because unfortunately I'm not familiar with how that Queensland software works. I do know that Queensland did a massive rollout of road safety risk managers several years ago, but I will check it out and get back to you, Albert.
Great.
Ooh, back to Simon, who's got the software.
Oh, we're back on.
Yes.
Okay.
So after logging in, this is what you'll see. So the first thing I'll show you is the user manual. So you just click on the button. It'll load up in your internet browser. I won't go through it all. It's pretty self-explanatory, but worthwhile knowing nonetheless. So before you start your investigation, you'll need to set your user options. So go to File, Options. So here you can see you need to select your jurisdiction. This is where the site's located, not where you're located. So for this example, I'm going to assume it's in Victoria. Fill in your name, your organisation, and a unique ID if you want. Okay, so to start a new investigation, you just need to click on the button, and here you'll start filling out the details for your investigation. So for the example, I'm just going to assume that the client's ARRB, and the study area was Theodore Murrah Road. So next. So here you select the most appropriate road section type. For this example, it will be a mid-block, undivided local road in an open area. So now you list the road names. In this case, it's just the one. So Theodore Murrah Road. And a road number if you want. This is optional, so I'm just going to leave it blank for today. The traffic volume was 400 vehicles per day, so AADT. If you're assessing an intersection, then it's the sum of the daily entering flows. So select the type of assessment, just one only. You can select either from the design and construction stage or an existing road environment. In this case, I'm going to select an existing road audit or safety review. So select the date of the investigation. I'm just going to select today's date, 5th of June. So your investigation team, in this case I'll just put myself down. You can enter in a project number if applicable. I'm just going to type in example and today's date. This will just allow you to find your projects later on by whatever system project number that you use. So here you select the nearest rainfall station. This list is based on the jurisdiction that you've selected in the options. So for this example, I'm just going to go with the first one, and as you can see, it will come up with the number of days in a year that it rains at the location. Likewise, number of days in a year that ice or snow is present. So you can fill in the general information about the investigation, such as crash history, reasons for the investigation, etc. Today I'm just going to leave this blank. So you click on Finish, and that's a summary of your investigation details. If you click on the Hazard Summary tab, you can see the list of the hazards that you've added to the investigation. Obviously we don't have any yet, but to add a new hazard, you just click on the New Hazard button. So here, what is the hazard identified? So no centre line. Where is the hazard located? So just a brief description. In this case, I'll say 100 metres south of the petrol station. So here you fill in the start chainage if available. In this case, it's 24.4. The length of the hazard. So in this case, it's 0.5 kilometres. I might ask Phil to explain a little bit more about the length of the hazard.
Certainly. Thanks, Simon. In the help files, there's a pretty good description. You might even say a lengthy description of how to handle length in Road Safety Risk Manager. If you've got any normal type of treatment such as this, where we're putting a centre line on the road, you simply put the length of the bit of road that you're going to put the line on. So Simon is showing us this for a 500 metre section of road, so he's put 0.5 kilometres in there. But for certain treatments and issues such as roadside hazards or holes in the road, potholes that have to be fixed, or trenches that need to be resurfaced to make them smooth, we've got a set of defined minimum lengths for these so that they can be assessed in a fairly consistent manner across different users. And also when you are dealing with an intersection, you have to allow 100 metres per approach to the intersection. And that means for a cross intersection you'd call it a 400 metre hazard, and for a T intersection it would be a 300 metre hazard. And then you in later screens you look at how the length of the hazard will be affected by the proportion of traffic that would actually encounter the problem. I won't go into more detail at the moment, but you do have to be aware of how to select the length because it's a quite important figure.
Great, thanks for that, Phil. So I'll click Next. So the exposure of the traffic volume to the hazard. In this case, all the traffic is going to be exposed to the hazard, so I'm going to select the traffic volume adjustment of 1. If, for example, you had a divided road and half of the traffic was exposed to the hazard, then you'd select 0.5 and so forth. So the general crash risk factor at the site, this is based on the road type that we've previously selected. So we can click Next. So select the issue that best represents the hazard in terms of the likely treatment type. In this case, it's going to be line marking and a center line. And so here you'll assign the relative risk. So we've got no center line present, so we'll select a relative risk of 1.31. You can do this with the slider or the text box. Other road factors at the site, so skid resistance. So we've got very good skid resistance for this example, so I'll leave this as 1. Lane width. So we have a road width of 7.1 meters, so we can assume that half of this is going to be the lane width, which is 3.55 meters, and approximate relative risk of 1.025. The shoulder width, so we've got a 0.6 meter unsealed shoulder, no sealed shoulder, so we can select the relative risk using the table or again using the slider or the text box. Line marking, in this case we have no edge line or center line present, so I will select 1.43.
So Simon, we actually have a question about, is the lack of a centre line a hazard?
Well, yeah, it's here we've come across this issue of the software assuming that you know what you are doing in deciding that you've got a problem and coming up with a treatment for it. So in certain circumstances, yes, the lack of a centre line could be deemed a hazard if the road is wide enough for a centre line to fit, for traffic to operate on both sides of it, either side of the line without running off the road. Then yes, you would say that you're better off having a centre line than not having one because it helps people to follow the road. If it was a very narrow piece of road where you just couldn't fit a centre line, then you might say that you're not going to make it much more hazardous by leaving out the centre line, and you could actually make it worse. But in this case, we're making the assumption that yes, it's a proper hazard that we have identified, and the treatment that we've identified is to put a centre line in. And it's under that context that the software gives you the relative risk values that you're going to operate with. Back to you, Simon.
Great, thanks Phil. So for the weather, the relative risk is already assigned based on the rainfall station that we've previously selected. You can change it if need be. So next. So for the speed environment, we've got a 100 km/h speed limit, so high travelling speeds. Now here you select the likely crash types. So I'm going to select head-on, loss of control, straight on road, and off-road straight. And here I'm just going to assume the split is 60, 20, 20. And that is an assumption, so here you can note your assumptions in this text box. For today's purposes, I'm just going to leave it blank. When you select an off-road straight crash type, you will be prompted to click the Edit button. Here you'll be asked to assign the clear zone. So in this case, I'll leave it as less than 1 meter. Okay, next. So there's your hazard risk score. So you can click Finish. Now to add a treatment, you click Edit Treatment. So this is all going to stay the same, but what is the recommended treatment? In this case, install center line. And the length of the treatment is going to be the same as the length of the hazard, so 0.5 k's. The exposure of the traffic to the hazard is going to remain the same, so next. The general crash risk factor will remain the same for this case. And the relative risk of the treatment will now change because we're present to install a center line. So we have a relative risk of 1. For the other road factors, these will all remain the same for this case, except for line marking, where we'll now have a centre line present. So we'll assign a relative risk of 1.14. This will all remain the same. Again, you'll be asked to click Edit and again assign the clear zone. So I'll leave this the same. And that's your treatment risk score there. So now you need to enter in your treatment life and cost. I'm going to assume a 10-year treatment life, an initial cost of say 2,500 and an ongoing cost of 1,250 per year. There is a discount rate of 6%. This is based on the jurisdiction that we've selected in our options before. You then get your risk reduction cost ratio of 0.64. You click Finish, and that's just a summary of your hazard and treatment. So you can click Close and Save. And then when you want to prioritize your sites or treatments, you click on Report Options, and you'll be able to select various report formats. I won't go through them all, but I'll show you the budget scenario analysis. So if you select that and click OK, you can select your individual sites. In this case, I'm going to select all of them, and then OK. And then you'll get a plot of all the projects. You can sort by RRCR. And then you can assign your given budget. So say, for example, 500,000, and that's defined by that green line in the graph there. And you can see the number of sites that you can treat within that budget. Likewise, that'll show up in this list as well. There'll be a green line highlighting the budget.
Can I answer someone's question
Sure,
at this point, Simon? It's relevant to all these risk reduction cost ratios we've come up with.
Yep.
We came up with a result of 0.64 then, I think. Just click that thing and get it out of the way. And a question that has come in from Brett is, does that 0.64 result mean that the treatment is not cost effective? And the answer is no, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's no good. With benefit cost ratios, you do have to get above 1 because that means you are getting more of a benefit than the amount of money you are spending. But Risk Manager is not trying to put a dollar value on the benefits. It is just comparing how much benefit you get per dollar, and if the benefits are really in a unitless kind of a manner. So if you look at two different projects and one of them gets 0.64 but the other one gets 0.6, then really the 0.64 project is the better one. Having said that, with all of the examples that we've put through Risk Manager and all the real cases that I've looked at, usually if something is worth doing, it tends to get about a 0.7 risk reduction cost ratio. We've just noticed that from the types of treatments we've been looking at. They can go up quite high as well, and getting a risk reduction cost ratio of 20 doesn't equate to a benefit cost ratio of 20 either. So you need to try and ignore what you know about benefit cost ratios when you are using this risk reduction cost ratio philosophy. Back to you.
That's actually the end of the worked example.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if Ganesh or Phil, you've got anything else to add?
We might just take some more questions. Phil has been madly typing away to those of you who are getting responses from him, so thank you, Phil. We will just take a few more questions now, so if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to send them through. And as stated earlier, we will send you the recording as well as a copy of the presentation notes. So we can, yes, right. So I assume Rsrm is estimating the crash risk frequency by the AADT exposure and crash prediction modelling. Can the user enter actual crash record if it varies from the average?
Right. Well, it's not really doing that. What Risk Manager is doing is building up a number that represents the hazard case, or the risk for the hazard case, It does that by starting with the length of the hazard and then putting in the number of vehicles per day, so the AADT, and then various other factors and multiplying them all by each other until it gets to a very large number of risk points or hazard points. And then when you do the treatment case, it reduces the results by some proportion depending on which treatment you've picked or what kind of risk reduction you pick for the treatment. So it gets a very large number that is smaller than the number you got in the first place, and that is your risk reduction ratio. So it's not trying to predict crashes, it's not a crash prediction model. It is just working on the numbers you've put into it to try and compare risks. It does have likelihoods of crashes built into it, but they are all taken from research reports on certain types of issues. So if you do have an actual crash record, you can't use that to alter the numbers that are going to Risk Manager other than to educate you on what kinds of proportions of crashes you can expect from the hazard that you're trying to treat. If any of that was a bit confusing, you're welcome to type in more questions about it and we'll answer them all as soon as we can.
Thanks, Phil. Another question about day or night conditions taken into consideration?
Yeah. Now, I've been thinking about this because I typed an answer for Jim about this question, but also I should tell everybody else. Day and night conditions will have been part of the research for some of the issues, such as street lighting or anything about the reflectivity of line marking and the visibility of signs, perhaps, but they are not specifically looked at by Risk Manager itself. The main way that you would look, you would make adjustments for day or night use would be to adjust the volume factor or the volume adjustment factor to take account of the likelihood that there'll be a lot less traffic per hour during the night than there would be during the day. But that doesn't affect really the likelihood of a certain hazard contributing to a crash. So we haven't, in most of the issues, there's not a consideration of whether the presence of light is going to increase the risk of a crash. What's next?
Okay, we've got a couple from Brett, so I thought we might cover those two. So if Brett's asking if we were to compare different treatments for one hazard, we could still compare the ratios?
Yep, that is, I think, related to an earlier question from, I think it was Brett. No, it wasn't, it was from somebody else, but Brett's on the same wavelength. You can go through and do a separate hazard and treatment assessment for one site, and you can do two assessments for it, but put different treatment in for each time, and that will give you two different results. And you can then compare those and give yourself an idea of how the risk reductions might work for two different treatments of the same hazard. But the reason that that's not automatic inside the software is that the original philosophy for this package was not to aid you in picking a treatment, it was just to help you arrange your budget so that you'll be the most cost effective. Because as we've said before, the software does assume that you have identified the hazard properly and you've picked the right treatment for it. So it's a capability you can sort of shoehorn into the software yourself, but it's not meant to do it.
Great. If the treatment is deemed to make the situation worse, will it result in a ratio of 0?
Yeah, well, it gives you a -1, which is an alarm bell that rings and says, yes, things are definitely not right.
Terrific.
So, and you'll achieve that by basically increasing the relative risk of something during that particular screen.
Thank you, Phil. A question in regards to ANRAM. Does ANRAM also utilise Rsrm when it comes to prioritisation?
It uses a lot of the same data, all the research reports that fed into the Risk Manager to give it all of its relative risks. A lot of that stuff is in ANRAM, but I'm not personally familiar with the inner workings of ANRAM because it's quite complicated the way that it works. And being a network-wide tool, it does different things, and it tries to help you spot problems in a different way. But it is a lot of the same research that backs it up.
Thank you. Now we also have, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes, so we'll keep taking as many questions as we can. Catherine's asking, how do you determine the breakdown of likely crashes before and after treatment?
This is a good one. There might be a bit about this in the help for a couple of the issues to help you get started on it, but it's an area where you really need to use a bit of judgment and decide what kinds of crashes could be caused by the problem that you are trying to treat. So with the one we looked at with putting a centre line on a road, I think we probably said that there'd be a risk of head-on crashes and of people running off the road after swerving away from a car coming the other way or not being able to see the road. You'll have to make judgments like that on all of the different issues that you assess, and the way that you work out the proportions that you might expect is really all down to you having a discussion with other practitioners who might be working with you, other colleagues, or perhaps consulting us here at ARRB, and we can give you an idea of what other people might have been doing. It's an educated guess, really, but the important thing to remember is that the proportions that you put into that severity screen with the crashes, you need to keep them the same for the before and after cases, because the reduction in the likelihood of an issue causing a crash should not affect the types of crashes you would expect that issue to cause. So going back to our centreline example, the centreline is going to cause a crash if someone fails to see it properly. So they fail to see it if it's not there, and they fail to see it if it was faded or obscured in some other way. And if they fail to see a centreline, the type of crash that's going to happen would probably be the same type, whether they don't see it because it's not there or because it's faded or anything like that. And so the before and after cases should still have the same types of crashes, because after you put a fresh centreline there could still be a reason that someone doesn't see it. And that is why the crash ratios have to stay the same. The type of issue that you would do where that would not apply would be if you were making certain crashes impossible. So if you changed the layout of an intersection and turned it into a grade separated interchange, for example, you will make it pretty much impossible to have a cross-traffic crash. And so those situations where you would have to change those crash types, but otherwise you leave them the same.
Thank you, Phil. We will just wrap up and do the summary and put some details up for who you can contact in regards to any more questions about Rsrm. And Ganesh, apologies, we are cutting you off for this part because the audio from Sydney wasn't so good today. So Phil, if you can just run us quickly through the summary and the final slides.
Certainly. So overall what we have here is a proactive treatment prioritisation tool, and it's aimed at just doing site-level investigations, and it assumes that you know what your safety problem is and you know how to fix it, and you have a lot of sites on which you want to do different things, and the problem you have is that you don't know where to spend your money first. It uses a risk-based approach to predict how well you're going to treat these sites, and then helps you develop a whole treatment program and assess the risk reductions for each site and then put them into priority order. And the aim of it is to give you the best value for money by maximising your risk reduction for the given budget. And it also helps you to track the effectiveness of treatment options by keeping a record of what you've done and then going back later and reminding yourself of what the treatments were. So if you would like to purchase Risk Manager or find out how to reactivate it if you have used it in the past and need to get back on board, here are the details. Our website has an Rsrm page, or you can ring us up or email the subscription service at ARRB. There is help desk support available for the software as well, and some training workshops planned at some stage in the near future. And there's always plenty of help available if you contact either of those people, Ganesh or Simon, who've given you the presentation today. And you can also, they might put you on to me if they need a bit of extra theoretical help, because I've been involved in some of the research behind the software.
Thank you, Phil.
You're welcome, Kate.
And apologies again to you, Ganesh. We do have some questions just in regards to is it freely available on the internet, and an indication of costs? Is it a license, a one-off cost, or an ongoing price? Phil, I know there's no simple answer to this one, but can you give
Yes. how does it work? It's a subscription-based service where you pay per seat, I believe. It used to be a single purchase piece of software where you still had a per user cost, but now it's different because we run it over the web. I'm not aware of what the actual costs are, so I wouldn't want to start estimating prices for you, but there is a table of them that we can send out to anybody who needs to know. And so we have quite a lot of you have typed questions in here about the costs, so we'll have all of your names now and we can send out the information that you need.
Terrific, thank you. And thank you everyone for your participation today. We have had a number of questions, so we'll endeavour to get you some answers to those in the next couple of days. Thank you to Ganesh, Simon and Phil for joining us for today's Rsrm webinar, and we'll keep in touch. Thanks again everyone and enjoy the rest of your day.